Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. My name is Hanns Koenig. I'm Aurora's Managing Director for Central Europe, heading up our Berlin office. And our guest today is the CEO of probably the leading remaining solar manufacturer in Europe, Meyer Burger. This podcast is, in a way, a follow-up to episode 171, where we discussed the rebuilding of European clean tech with Alexander Vogt from HH2E and Stoff 2. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, I would encourage you to do that. But before you dial off, I would like to very warmly welcome Gunter Erfurt to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know you're always very busy, but at the moment particularly busy with everything that's going on, which we'll discuss in a moment. So thank you for joining us today. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with Meyer Burger yet, can you give us a quick introduction of your company and your current operations?
I do an elevator pitch, crisp and short, as good as I can. So Meyer Burger is a 70-years-old Swiss headquartered technology company, founded obviously by two gentlemen, Mr. Meyer and Mr. Burger, two Swiss engineers who started their business in the Swiss watch machinery industry. And they did that quite successfully until the late 60s. And then they joined semiconductor business with equipment to slice wafers. And we all know that solar cells also do contain wafers, and that has pretty much been the entry point into the PV industry in the mid-90s. And since then, we have a strong focus on photovoltaic technology until 2020 as a technology and equipment developer and manufacturer. So our customers have been the who's who companies that we all know today, primarily in China. And almost 4 years back now, the company made quite a turn in a different approach. We have entered into a captive business model. We continue to be a technology developer. We continue to be an equipment maker, but the result of our ongoing R&D work is only made available to ourselves. And we have started in summer 2021 to produce solar cells and solar modules in Germany. So we are not the last man standing, if we will, but we are the first who has started again to bring this beautiful industry back to Europe.
Very interesting, and that's why we're talking today. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you made this shift from equipment manufacturer for the wider industry to only building your own equipment to then actually manufacture cells and modules?
So there are various reasons, starting with a bit of an analysis of our old business, if we will. The long story short is that as a technology and equipment developer, you become pretty much a victim of your own success. What do I mean by this? If we compare the equipments Meyer Burger made in the late 90s or in the earlier 2000 years, and compare them with the equipment today, what we see is in some of the cases, productivity increases, which are eight times higher or even tenfold or something like this. But the equipment itself per unit is much, much lower in the sales price. So we have a situation where the technology company Meyer Burger has shrunk its own revenue pool, where we have sold 10 tools 20 years ago, we would sell only one anymore. And this one tool is 50% of the list price of the tool we have sold 20 years ago. So we have, in some cases, a shrinking of the revenue pool of the factor 20. And the advantage of the technology development goes entirely to the customer. And that's why we decided we need to change the business model in a direction where we are also benefiting from all our technology developments we have been doing in the past, and this is definitely better in producing solar cells and solar modules. So that's one reason. And the other main reason why we did that shift is the protection of the IP. Usually, and that's not only applicable to solar, technology and IP is being lost via the equipment, not necessarily because someone reads a patent, but if you give someone a detailed piece of equipment that you can use to produce a certain technology, that's how you lose your technology. And so this is has maybe been a late awakening of Meyer Burger as a 70 years old equipment maker, but our industry is so aggressive also in terms of IP theft that we believe putting this all under stealth or in stealth mode is definitely helpful. And the new developments Meyer Burger has been doing in the past years are only visible to ourselves, to our team, and our own manufacturing now. And that, in our opinion, protects our IP much, much better. And of course, also in the combination with patents, we are still filing, and we believe this is the better protection for our precious technology.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that explanation. On a more personal note, how did you personally get involved with Meyer Burger and become the company CEO? Because I mean, you've been around the solar industry for a very long time. So it'd be great if you could give us a quick recap of that.
No, that's indeed a very, very long relationship with Meyer Burger. So in fact, I joined solar 20 years ago in 2003. I was graduated as a PhD in physics and joined a subsidiary of Solar World at the time in Germany as an R&D engineer. And on day one of my engagement with Solar World, I got appointed a project manager in a project with Meyer Burger. So on day one of my joining of the solar industry, that name came across. And later I found out that the company Meyer Burger is active in Germany and even in East Germany, or has been active there even before the war came down. So since 1986, Meyer Burger's around in the city of Freiberg, where we are operating our solar cell, our solar module line today, because we have our colleagues here from Siltronic, the semiconductor wafer maker, and they have been using Meyer Burger source even before it became Siltronic. So there's a long history, and so the company was known and latest to me when I joined this first job at Solar World, and then I was always amazed by the technological capabilities and the products. And in 2015, I made a personal decision to leave Solar World. And then, things come together. One door closes, another door opens, and this was Meyer Burger. And I joined as a managing director for the Germany operations. And then 2 years later, became appointed group CTO for the Swiss holding. And then together with this strategy shift, I was appointed CEO. So that's the story. The first non-Swiss CEO in 70 years history.
Okay, wow, that's quite a big deal. And you now spend your time between Switzerland and Germany, or how does that work?
Wherever I need to be. I mean, we are a global company. We have offices also in Asia and Singapore. We have a location in China still. We have 3 sites in Switzerland, 4 sites in Germany. We have 2 sites in the United States. So I would describe myself as a frequent traveler. So wherever I'm needed, I'm going.
Great. So let's move on to today's topic, the European solar industry, and let's start at a really high level. How dependent on imports are we?
I would say we are literally and de facto 100% dependent on imports because Meyer Burger's contribution for the time being is still very small. We are in growth mode. We want to become much, much bigger. But if I just look into our installed capacity in Germany nowadays, that equals maybe 0.3 or 0.5% of the global market. So it's homeopathic. And China has done a great job in dominating this industry, and not for the simple reason that China is per se the best place to produce these type of products, but because of a very, very smart, I would call it a geo-industry policy scheme that's in place in China, and which has been overlooked in the West for too long. And we see now the US moving under the Inflation Reduction Act, and with a very strong reshoring program, which is until so far very successful, including also Meyer Burger's contribution of erecting 2 factories in the US. Whereas Europe is still trying to find its position in this new geopolitical relationship. And what's also overlooked to a large degree in primarily Europe is a solar module is not just a commodity product. That's how people are describing it, because the definition of a commodity product is that you at all times, at all locations and regions, have free access to the product at competitive pricing. And this, I would argue, cannot be guaranteed. Currently, we are seeing growing tensions in the Red Sea, Strait of Hormuz, which is the main route for container ships to Europe from Asia. We should be more cautious regarding our own resilience in Europe, and our resilience in Europe is very, very weak. And this is exactly a weakness that other regions in the world have recognized, that the Europeans are weak and they can attack us at this weak point. And I'm alerting a bit, because I think other industries should watch the solar industry very carefully, because that's the blueprint of what's going to happen in other industries as well, if no countermeasures are put in place. And this is, in our opinion, a very decisive point in time now. We have a massive opportunity ahead of us as a European continent, because on the one hand, we have this strong dependence from China. On the other hand, Europe is still, and since more than 2 decades, the technology leader in photovoltaics, because of all the great institutes, Fraunhofer, Helmholtz, INES in France, ECN in the Netherlands, IMEC in Belgium. So there's a huge network and ecosystem of strong R&D, and the world is relying on it until today, also the Chinese. And our argument is, why don't we connect a very, very smart innovation policy in Europe, which is really good at the European levels, but also the national levels, and just do an add-on of smart industry policy for more wealth, more jobs, and energy security, and more resilience in Europe.
Great pitch, thank you. And I want to get on about what can be done about this in a second. But before we do that, dig a little bit deeper into how we got where we are, and probably the main driver for this dependence has been economics, in the sense that Chinese, if you're a developer in Europe, potentially also elsewhere, Chinese modules are just very competitive. So can you talk us through how the economics of a module made in Europe or made in America would compare to a module made in China?
I have a very simple answer. If there were no subsidies in place and involved anywhere, then we would have a super competitive landscape globally. There is no argument why manufacturing of this technology is by nature cheaper in China compared to other places in the world. And why is that? Because if you look into a standard solar module today, and 95% of all products are silicon based. That means you are growing a so-called ingot, a silicon ingot from so-called polysilicon feedstock material. And if we start from scratch of this in the supply chain, then the polysilicon, for instance, the largest non-Chinese or non-Asian manufacturer is Wacker Chemie in Germany, and they also operate a site in the US. So they do that in Germany, and we all know Wacker. It's a very successful company. So there is apparently not a real big issue with manufacturing polysilicon in Europe, and also in the US. The feedstock they need is so-called metallurgical silicon. That can be produced everywhere, because the raw material, the material that it all starts with, is a quartz mineral, and quartz is the most highly available mineral in the Earth's crust. So there's no issue with the availability of quartz, and it's also available in Germany even, and in Norway. So what I'm saying is there's no real constraint in regards to the feedstock materials, as opposed to maybe in the battery world, where we talk a lot about other materials which are a bit more precious and difficult to access, where China might have a dominance. It's entirely different in PV. So if you continue with the polysilicon and the ingoting, what's happening after that is the slicing of the wafers. This is also a European technology, got first invented by Meyer Burger. We have sold the business, by the way, 4 years ago, but not to a Chinese company, but to a company that operates in Germany, in Rendsburg, in Schleswig-Holstein, Labmaster Walter, relatively known in semiconductor, and they continue this business. Solar cells, I just spoke about the technology strength of Europe. We have everything in place that we need to produce solar cells in terms of the equipment, in terms of the materials required. In the module, it is a bit of a challenge still in terms of the supply chain, because we have, for instance, only one last man standing in Europe, in Germany, a company that produces solar glass, and their capacity is too small to, provide 100% of the glass required. So you have to go to other sources in Asia. But in general, what applies is exactly what I described. There is no real, technology constraint or raw material constraint, and the cost structure of a silicon solar module contains like 70, maybe 80% material. The smallest part in it is personnel expenses, so labor cost, very low. If you look into our solar cell line in the state of Saxony-Anhalt, north of Leipzig in Germany, usually journalists ask us, what's going on in here? Well, why are there no people? Are they already at home, or what's going on here? Or have you stopped manufacturing? And the answer is there are no people. There are a few that control screens and push a few buttons or clean a machine once in a while. But you can highly automate solar cell manufacturing. That's why labor costs do not play the most important role in here. So yes, there is a difference still in between China and the rest of the world because of the scaling of the Chinese. So they operate some people say 800 gigawatt installed capacity of solar cell and module manufacturing. Nobody really knows, but active is maybe a capacity of a bit less than 500 gigawatt. But also the effect of the scaling on the cost down the last 20 years is over-exaggerated, because people usually think the more you scale, the cheaper it gets. That's not true in our industry. The higher the efficiency gets, the cheaper it gets. That's the trick. And the contribution of the cost down from scaling is 20% only, and 80% is technology. And here I go again with my argument. If a continent and a country like Germany and also Switzerland, not to forget about, are leading in technology development, why do we give it all to foreign countries to make ourselves depending on them, as opposed to using this great opportunity and growing a brilliant and beautiful industry that provides, highly qualified jobs for the youth in all areas, young engineers, operators, whatsoever, because the economics of a solar module manufacturing is not really differing too much from place to place. But maybe closing this question, or my answer to this question, The big problem is that China is distorting the market by pouring so much subsidy money into it. We have heard figures of more than $1 trillion that was poured into the Chinese solar industry under the Made in China 2025 Act, which got published, I think, in 2014 or 15. That would have been the moment that Europe should have woke up, but didn't. And the US then made it under the IRA and has this reshoring program. It's also subsidized, and Europe is now lacking the answer. But in the long run, what we would recommend to all politicians globally, at least in the West, is go to WTO. Correct it by going to the WTO and make sure that this industry is not subsidized anywhere. But before we have a solution from the WTO, Europe also needs to do their part to, protect this industry and get the part of the business Europe deserves.
Okay, interesting. Can we just double click on the on the subsidies question? So what form do these subsidies take? I don't know how much transparency there is on this, but is this just production subsidies or subsidizing the inputs? Is this cheap financing? Is this something else? All of the above?
Yes,
in China specifically.
If we start a bit from scratch, why are the Chinese doing it? Again, they have my sincerest respect for what they do, because they have recognized earlier than the West the importance of solar, whereas the West is still, considering fusion reactors and other stuff as the future. Other regions of the world have already dropped these ideas and focus on what's really working. And solar is for sure the most important future source of electrical energy generation. So this is a fact. And the subsidies they have provided, they vary also from province to province. They contain, recently, I can tell a pretty interesting story. My head of R&D joined a technology conference in China like 4 weeks back. And the Western CTOs got all gathered in a room with the province head. And then the province head, the political leader, did ask the CTOs, the Western CTOs, what do you recommend as a new technology if we were to build a new solar cell factory here in this province? And they would give their vote and, express their opinions. And then the guy would go like, okay, thank you for this, strong recommendation of whatever technology. And we are going now to a signing ceremony, and the government will finance a 12 gigawatt solar cell and module facility 100%. The capex is 100% covered by the government. We are hearing things that electricity is for free, chemicals are for free, the buildings are built by the military, personnel costs are paid by the government. And we also have to understand the Chinese challenges. They have to generate millions of new jobs every year. We are hearing about the issue with youth unemployment. So this is a big deal for the Chinese, also for social welfare and that they have a united society and to some degree, and of course job creation plays an important role, and solar is the perfect industry to contribute heavily. And this is why the subsidy scheme is not transparent, of course not. If you ask Chinese companies about their subsidies, they would tell you there are no subsidies at all. We are so productive and so great and can do it all. But this is definitely not true. The International Energy Agency has come up with their assessment. Recently, we heard this 1 trillion argument over the last 15 years. So, the West should ask themselves, why are they doing it? And some other people argue, why are they pouring so much dollars and euros in? I tell you my opinion. I would say they are not pouring a single euro or dollar into it, because China has done another brilliant job, by the way, also in other industries, of growing their own domestic supply chain. So whatever they subsidize goes in renminbi. And that's their own currency, and they can do whatever they want with their own currency, as opposed to using, precious dollars or euros to pour into it. And that's, a smart move. And again, as I emphasized earlier in our discussion here, other industries should watch very carefully, because that's the blueprint of what automotive can expect to happen, or wind can expect to happen. So Europe needs to act, otherwise we will fall victim to these activities.
Before we move on to what Europe should do, one other follow-up on something you said, which I found very interesting, and that is, you've got all the world records for efficiencies being made in Europe. I think Fraunhofer ISE in Freiberg is usually one of the top institutes that tends to set the world record every couple of months or years. How does that then end up in Chinese manufacturing? So what is the process, or how is the intellectual property transferred?
Well, in the past, and this is also the learning process of Meyer Burger, I can hide behind a bit, my predecessors maybe, but I don't want to, because I wasn't there at the time. But and I don't want to come across, as the wise guy here who has known better after the fact. That's not true. It's a learning process of the entire European equipment industry. And when Europe's solar industry kicked off in the first place, more than 20 years ago, and did a great job in industrializing technologies, and involving many great companies from Europe. They had then recognized under the Chinese subsidy scheme to grow the industry that they can make a brilliant business there. The Chinese were fully depending on primarily German equipment, or from German companies and Swiss companies with Meyer Burger and others, and that's how technology got transferred. That's what I mentioned also earlier when I said that the main reason for our strategy shift has been the need to protect the technology. And if you give a piece of equipment, our deposition, our nano layer deposition tools, they consist of 50,000 single parts that are being assembled. This is ultra smart engineering work, equipment engineering work. And if you sell such a piece of equipment to someone, they can disassemble it, they can copy it. That has been pretty much the way of the technology transfer. I would say even some sort of, an official technology transfer to their facilities. And the way it works with the institutes is also something that need to be reconsidered if there should be changes to the IP management. Give you an example. The currently established new, let's call it standard technology in China, it's the Me Too stuff that everybody produces, is a solar cell technology called TOPCon. That stands for tunnel oxide passivated contact. It's a very smart idea, and this was first laid down and written down by a guy named Stefan Klunz, Professor Stefan Klunz of Fraunhofer ISE, and his team. So this is a made in Germany technology. Of course, what researchers usually do is, of course, they know, we need to file a few patents, but they are also pretty keen on publishing and going to conferences and tell everyone how they did it. And that's another strange approach in our industry. There are probably like 5 annual conferences on technology where everybody speaks about everything. You won't find it in any other industry. So there is a bit of a notion that solar cell technology know-how belongs into the public domain, or should be, subject to kind of an open access approach, which I find pretty unwise. Every company has its trade secrets, and they should wisely consider, including also the institutes, am I giving that for free to everyone? Or is there maybe a value behind, and even a strategic value? And until so far, I think the Chinese can't stop laughing at the Europeans, how we are acting. And we definitely need to reconsider this approach and make sure that we are not falling victim to this dependency push. And I'm really afraid that, and the Europeans should be afraid as well, that if all European nations are sooner or later recognizing the importance of solar, and that's, maybe a question of another 5 years until also all these dreams about new nuclear power plants are gone, and then everybody understands, well, solar is it, because in combination with storage technologies, that's the cheapest, the smartest, the easy to install way of tackling the energy transition. But what if we can't find access to the product? And last year, European Union installed 41.4 gigawatt of solar. That equals 220,000 solar modules per day. A 40-feet container that sits on a vessel that then gets stuck in the Suez Channel contains 900 modules. So everybody can now crunch the numbers, how much volume this is that moves throughout Europe every day. And we are just at the beginning. Europe is going to install soon a 3-digit gigawatt amount, maybe from 2030 onwards, 100, maybe then 150 gigawatt whatsoever. And this all comes from one country. We should really, really reconsider this strategy.
Okay, well, let's talk about what should be done to reconsider, or what should be done concretely. And to make this a bit more specific, let's look toward the US, where you, as you mentioned, recently announced 2 new factories, while actually your factories in Europe are struggling quite a bit, at least from what I'm reading in the press. Why is that?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say that they are struggling. The factories are running, and we have optimized a lot. Where we do struggle, and the entire industry does, is the market situation with all these distortions from the dumping prices of the Chinese. So the situation we do observe globally is that the larger solar markets, i.e. US, India, and of course also China, have changed gears or switched gears in terms of some sort of protectionism that was embedded. So in China, you cannot enter if you're not Chinese. So this market is closed to anyone else. So this is also something that is, in our opinion, unfair. India has imposed tariffs a couple of years ago, and they have also some sort of endorsement programs, state subsidy programs to reshore solar manufacturing. And there are large projects ongoing of hundreds of gigawatts. And that makes sense because it's a 1.7 billion people country with a lot of energy demand in the future. And the US also since, I shouldn't say since ever, but since around 2012, 2013, had imposed certain tariffs that protected the US solar industry. And all these schemes, they are now being further strengthened, both in India, but also in the US. And the Chinese, they have, over the past 15 years, if we will, grown, I would say purposefully. Others say it just happened, but from an economics point of view, it doesn't make sense that it just happened. What they did is they grew a 40% this year. It's the highest number, a 40% overcapacity. So they have 40% of idle capacities in China. So what's happening if you have overcapacity? Your prices are dropping from one day to the other. And the difficulty currently is that neither India nor the US do let all this product enter the country. So they have very strict measures in place, primarily the US, with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, certain tariffs. Just recently, last week, I think, or 2 weeks back, Florida Senator Rubio, Republicans, brought in a law draft into the Senate that's called the American Manufacturing Prevention Act. What it does is it's aiming at basically excluding Chinese companies from benefiting from IRA money in the US. So they really mean it in terms of the reshoring both countries. Europe has not done anything yet. And so all the product that was supposed to land or bound for US or India is now landing in Europe. And we have a massive oversupply situation in Europe. 65 unprecedented 65 gigawatt are expected to sit in European harbor warehouses. That's more than what the European Union is installing in 1 year. And maybe another pretty odd thing that we are suffering from, all the European module makers, is the fact that the European Union is punishing the European solar module makers with tariffs we have to pay. So what they are trying to do is they want to protect the so-called inner market in Europe. But the problem is that the products they are having or put heavy duties on are not even available in the European Union. So we are paying for something that we couldn't even source in the European Union. Give you two examples. Meyer Burger is procuring high-tech metallization paste and some encapsulating materials in Japan for our products. High quality, super components, and they are being tariffed. So we pay millions of tariffs to customs. And anyone who's importing a product, and primarily the Chinese, can do that entirely barrier-free. Is that fair? Not at all. And so the way forward for Europe is, and that's maybe even an opportunity. We are slow, but we have now the chance to also observe what's going well in India and in the US, because the IRA in the US looks great, and it is great, no doubt about it, but it also has some risk of failure embedded in it, because it's just a subsidy that you get for producing a solar module. Nobody requires you to produce a high quality product. Nobody requires you to produce a high efficiency product. You just get it per watt peak produced. And nobody cares, at least not for the moment, whether or not your product is degrading too fast. And Europe, I think, has done a smarter approach. If we look into Germany with kind of an RFQ that the German Ministry of the Economies and Climate Action did in summer, where you have to tick certain boxes technologically in order to be even able to apply to the program with higher efficiency, lower degradation, recyclability, and so on and so forth. And then you get selected, and you have a selection of projects that make it through. And you can in a very determined way, put a bit of, fertilizer subsidies onto it, because the larger part of the investment money comes from the private sector, that's for sure. And so we believe it all needs to focus on growing resilience, as opposed to, pushing the Chinese out. Nobody wants it, but we want fair and a fair level playing field in Europe, and we need to create it. And then I believe solar industry will have a very bright and sunny future in Europe as well.
At least listening to the pronouncements from European politicians, both in Brussels, but also in Berlin and various other capitals, the problem seems to have been recognized. And of course, there's also the plan to create an EU Net Zero Industry Act to support all this. How is that falling short of delivering what you need?
Yeah. Unfortunately, for the time being, there are more announcements, even some marginal announcements. So we did hear almost 2 years back from Kadri Simpson. She is the energy commissioner under Ursula von der Leyen's commission presidency. And she said, after Russia invaded Ukraine, a month later, she said, "We will bring solar manufacturing back to Europe, whatever it takes." That's how she made it pretty strict, and everybody got excited until so far. In the favor of the European Commission, I have to say, they did a year later deliver by number one, allowing the member states to do more state aid for certain critical industries, not only solar, under the so-called temporary crisis and transition framework. That's a bit of kind of an exempt of European state aid rules that makes subsidy schemes easier to implement for the member states. That's I shouldn't say in full swing, but Germany has reacted, the Netherlands did, Italy did, Spain did. So we may see something coming out of this shortly. In Germany, unfortunately, it's got a bit held back by the budget crisis that hopefully we have overcome now. And the program has made it through. So it's still alive, even though it's got a bit haircut, but it's still alive. That's good. And the second thing that the European Union or the European Commission did, they put forward a draft for the so-called Net Zero Industry Act. We are reading a lot about in the press, and some people do perceive it as a law that's already in place and effective. It's not. It has not yet passed the legislation process completely, but it's in the last stage of passing it. It has made it through the European Parliament in November. It's got adopted. It has also received some sort of blessing from Energy Minister Council of the 27 member states. And now it has entered into the so-called trilogue process between the Commission, the Parliament, and the European Council. And observers expect this law to pass effectively, sometime in Q1 2024. And that would be very, very good news because it's a European overarching law that needs to be nationally embedded in legislation schemes by 27 member states within a certain transition period. I'm not exactly sure how long that can take. I think 18 months or so. But and maybe to close with my answer, the Germany has done something pretty bold, and we are putting a lot of hope into the process. The currently debated Solar Package 1 in the German parliament, which partly made it through last Friday, but only 6 out of, I think, or less than 10 out of, I think, 120 or 130 items that need to be amended. This is scheduled now for January to potentially adopt a resilience scheme into the German Renewable Energy Act, the Erneuerbare Energiengesetz, EEG. And if we are making it, then we have pretty much done step 2 before the step 1. So that's the national version of the Net Zero Industry Act in solar, at least for the time being. We know that the colleagues in the wind industry are now looking into something very similar because they are facing the same problems with Chinese rivals, which are state-aided and distort the market in their favor. And so that's the expectation, and we know that other German member states, larger solar markets like France and Spain and others, are eyeing the Germans in Berlin. What they are doing in the parliament process, and if it makes it through, then we could also see a run of the other member states just copying it, the German version, and then we have the solution for the entire European Union. That must be the target.
Okay, well, good to hear that. So what I'm getting from what you're saying is that we're not there yet in Europe, nor in Germany, but we're on a trajectory where next year we might be on track to actually see some substantial investments in manufacturing.
Definitely, and I put a bit we need to take it a bit with a grain of salt because we have not anymore all time in the world. So that needs to turn effective into law in January or no later than February, at least starting in Germany, because the industry needs to make decisions. Currently, it's such an unfair and no level playing field we have in Europe that companies here all consider, the question, do we continue? Yes or no? Or are we better going elsewhere? And we should not get to the point that the industry is giving up on Europe and focuses elsewhere, or is getting in distress or whatsoever. So politicians need to understand not the industry can wait for lawmaking schedules or timelines, but the other way around. The politics need to orientate on the desires and the needs of the industry, because what's happening in the market is not in our responsibility. We cannot change it. We cannot change distortions which are state-made, if we will, and that's why politics is now requested to act.
As a final question, in this part. So we've talked a lot about what government could do. I would like to close it off with what the other side of the market actually could do. So your clients, the rooftop installers, the project developers of larger scale projects, and so forth. Do they have to accept a premium to some extent to support local manufacturing? If so, how can they? Or is this simply a problem the market cannot resolve, and you need politics to step in? What are you getting from your conversations with your clients?
Well, we need to differentiate a bit the segment we are talking about. If we are talking about the residential segment, so small home systems, 10 kilowatt peak, that's the typical European standard size. We do have great support from installers already, and the pretty odd thing here is also, and I can only urge any potential end customer who's considering a solar installation to very carefully check offers, because the only stakeholder, if you will, in the entire chain from production to once it's installed on a roof is the end customer, who does not benefit from the low prices that we currently see in the market. Because what has happened to some degree is that the margin pool has shifted towards the installers, and the end customer, as I said, does not really benefit. So we know examples where 100% Chinese products, some of them with questionable quality or a lot of toxic stuff in it or violating European IP whatsoever, is sold at higher prices than a 100% made in Germany system. That's happening as we speak. So this is something that I believe is not a good business conduct, and I don't want to say that the entire installer industry does it, but there are a few examples who are having this as a business model, just generating super high margins and using a bit the missing education of end customers. So that's why every end customer should very carefully question what he's getting presented. And I can tell you, if you find the right installer, they will install you a fully made in Germany system at the same price as a Chinese system. So that's one thing. Where I do have an understanding that companies cannot go for European product is the utility market, because what's happening in Germany, for instance, the Bundesnetzagentur, federal agency, is tendering and RFQing larger solar installations, and the only criterion is price. That's it. So what's happening now in Europe is that we install super cheap systems. That's true. But the price for this is paid by others. It's paid by, the slaves in China, in the Uyghur region. It's paid by European companies who are losing their IP. It's paid by unfair movements in the markets with undercutting prices in order to push out competitors. So this is what needs to be considered. And if I had a wish free, then I would say, if the entire European industry would march a bit united, we would probably come to an assessment that out of the 55 gigawatt we will see in 2023, end deployed or end installed solar systems, all segments, residential, utility, commercial, industrial. If we would have blended into the 55 gigawatt, the maximum maybe 3 or 4 gigawatt of European made modules today would have made it a difference in the margin pool or in the P&L of installers and developers? I would say no. And acting like this, and again, I don't want to come across as the wise guy who knows it all. It's way more complex than what I'm saying, and I have a lot of understanding for installers why they are not going with a European product more aggressively. But if we were blending it basically voluntarily into the product portfolio, then we would be much better off, and we could have we would not have needed this political debate that we are currently in. And maybe a last comment from my side. The worst thing that might happen to the European industry, and this is not pushed forward by the industry, but there is some political movement behind it, would be tariffs, trade barriers. And what we've brought forward as an industry is this NCIA-related resilience scheme, which basically combines the best of the both worlds. China can continue dumping modules into Europe. The cheaper, the better. But we are in parallel growing this resilience segment. And it compares easily to maybe a picture I may draw. You are driving a car, I would presume, and it would be the same as if you would say, well, I have a driver license since 20 years and never ever anything happened to me. From next year onwards, I drop my car insurance. I don't need it. It's a waste of money. And then that's exactly the same thing that happens in Europe. So we say, okay, it's so super cheap, never change a running system, but there's no resilience insurance in it. And the 3 or 4 gigawatt versus 55, that's such a small number, which in my opinion would even work without any political intervention. But since it's not happening, I think the governments need to act on it. And they need to endorse it, that we get resilience, and ideally also via the solar industry as a blueprint for other industries. Because as I said, I'm expecting the same thing to happen in wind, in battery, in automotive, in all industries. And they should not fall victim to these activities.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a powerful closing statement if I've ever heard one. That brings us to the end of the podcast, unfortunately, because I think we could continue for hours. This was fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us, Gunter. And thank you all for dialing in and listening. I'm sure this debate will continue in 2024. And maybe we can have you back on the pod sometime next year to hopefully look back on all the successful legislation that has been passed at the European and German level. Thank you for joining us, Gunter.
Thank you, Hans.
That was Hanns Koenig, Aurora's Managing Director for Central Europe, talking to Gunter Erfurt, CEO of Meyer Burger. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening and goodbye.